1923, the overnight shift at the Milwaukee docks meant cold, hard labor under dim lamps, the constant smell of fish and diesel, and the rhythmic slap of black water against pilings. We unloaded freight steamers from across the Great Lakes, worked through fog and wind, and rarely questioned the sounds that came from the water after midnight. But that autumn, something changed in the harbor. Crates arrived torn open from the inside. Thick scratches appeared on steel hulls below the waterline, and on certain nights, when the fog rolled in heavy and the moon stayed hidden, we heard a breathing sound rise from the depths that no man could explain. So before we continue, please make sure you subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. I was 26 that year and had worked the dock since I was 17. My father had done the same before me, and his father before that, back when the harbor was mostly sail and timber. The old man used to tell stories about the early days, when wooden schooners lined the piers 3 deep, and the air smelled of fresh-cut pine instead of coal smoke and engine oil. He spoke of captains who knew the lake by feel alone, who could read the color of the water and predict storms days before they arrived. He never spoke of things living beneath the surface, but sometimes late at night, when the wind came off the water just right, he would go quiet and stare toward the harbor with an expression I could not read. By 1923, steam had taken over, and the work had grown harder. The old sailing ships had been replaced by massive steel freighters that rode low in the water under the weight of ore and grain. The shifts ran longer, the cargo weighed more, and the bosses pushed us faster to keep pace with Chicago and Detroit. Milwaukee was fighting to remain competitive, and we felt that pressure in every crate we lifted and every ton we moved. I did not mind the work itself. I liked the weight of rope in my hands and the clean ache in my shoulders after a full night of loading. There was satisfaction in seeing a ship unloaded before dawn, in knowing that our crew had moved more cargo than the day shift. The money was decent for a young man with no family, and I had grown strong from the labor. My hands were calloused thick enough to grip wet rope without flinching, and my back had learned to bear weight that would have broken me in my first year. What bothered me was the silence that had settled over the older men that season. They spoke less, watched the water more, and refused to work the far pier after dark without at least 4 men present. These were not nervous men. They had survived winters that froze the harbor solid and storms that sank ships within sight of the breakwater. They had seen men crushed by shifting cargo and drowned when they fell between boat and dock. Death was part of the work, accepted and mourned, and then set aside so we could continue. But this new wariness felt different. It was not fear of accident or weather, it was fear of something deliberate. I worked alongside a crew of 8 regulars. There was Frank, our foreman, a thick-shouldered man from Poland who had survived the crossing and steerage and never complained about cold or exhaustion. He had come to America with nothing but the clothes on his back and a determination to build something better. Within 5 years, he had worked his way up from sweeping warehouse floors to running the night crew. He was fair but demanding, expecting every man to pull his full weight without excuses. Frank had a wife and 3 daughters in a small house near the Polish neighborhood, and he worked the docks so they would never know hunger. Next to him was old Henrik, a Norwegian who had worked ore boats on Superior before the accidents drove him south to calmer waters. Henrik's hands were scarred from hot metal, and his voice carried the rasp of a man who had breathed too much coal dust. He never spoke about what he had seen on Superior, but sometimes when the wind came from the north, he would stop working and tilt his head as if listening to voices carried on the air. The younger men made jokes about Henrik's superstitions, the way he would not work on certain dates, or how he insisted on touching iron before boarding a boat. But I noticed that Frank never dismissed Henrik's warnings, and the accidents we avoided often came on days when Henrik had advised caution. Then there was Tommy. Just 19, eager and loud, always trying to prove himself with lifts he should not have attempted alone. He had grown up in the 3rd Ward, one of 7 children in a family that barely scraped by. Tommy saw the docks as his chance to become something more than another hungry mouth. He wanted to earn enough to move his mother out of the tenement and into a proper house with a yard. His enthusiasm sometimes made him reckless, rushing through tasks that required patience, taking risks that made Frank shout warnings. Beside Tommy worked his older brother Jack, quieter and steadier, who kept one eye on Tommy and one on the work. Jack had been looking after Tommy since their father died in a factory accident 6 years earlier. He had the worn look of a man who carried responsibilities beyond his age. Where Tommy was all energy and ambition, Jack was measured and careful, thinking 3 steps ahead, catching problems before they became disasters. We had 2 Irish brothers, Seamus and Patrick, who moved cargo with a rhythm that came from years of working together, finishing each other's sentences, and never needing to call out warnings. They had emigrated from County Cork during the Troubles and found work on the docks within a week of landing. They spoke with thick accents that some of the other workers struggled to understand, but their actions needed no translation. They could move twice the cargo of most men because they worked as a single unit, anticipating each other's movements with an almost supernatural coordination. The last man was Vincent, a thin, sharp-eyed Italian who had come up from the canneries and knew how to read the lake better than any chart. Vincent had grown up in a fishing village on the Adriatic and understood water in a way that landlocked men never could. He could predict weather changes by the smell of the air and the color of the waves. He knew which currents ran where and how the lake bed shaped the movement of ships and cargo. The other workers valued his knowledge even as they found him strange and distant. Vincent kept his own counsel, spoke only when necessary, and spent his breaks staring at the water with an intensity that made some men uncomfortable. Vincent noticed things others missed. He saw the changes first. It started small in late September when the first cold winds came down from the north. A crate of machine parts arrived from Duluth with the corner boards splintered outward. The shipping company blamed rough handling, but Vincent crouched beside it and ran his fingers along the wood. "These boards split from inside," he said. Something pushed hard enough to crack 3 inches of pine. Frank told him to note it on the manifest and move on. 2 days later, another shipment came in damaged. This time, it was a wooden barrel of salted fish from Escanaba. The lid had been pried off, and the contents scattered across the hold. The smell was overwhelming. Not just spoiled fish, but something sharper underneath, like ammonia mixed with lake water. Henrik refused to go near it. He stood at the edge of the cargo hold and shook his head. "I have smelled that before," he said. "On Superior, when the ice broke up in spring, dead things float up from the bottom and sit in the sun. That is what this smells like, but stronger." We scrubbed the hold with lye and seawater. The smell faded but never fully left. That night, Vincent pointed out marks on the hull below the waterline. Deep gouges ran in parallel lines across the steel plating. They were evenly spaced and curved slightly, as if something with claws or talons had dragged itself along the side of the ship while it sat at anchor. Frank reported it to the company office, but they dismissed it as ice damage from the northern crossing. It was not ice. Ice does not leave marks that deep or that regular. The weather turned colder in early October. Fog rolled in most nights and hung thick over the water until mid-morning. The harbor grew quieter. Fewer ships came in. The ones that did arrive seemed rushed, their crews eager to unload and leave before nightfall. I noticed the captains spent less time in the harbor taverns. They stayed on their boats, kept their running lights burning, and posted extra watch even when docked. One evening, I asked Captain Morrison about it. He was a gruff Scotsman who ran a freight steamer between Milwaukee and Muskegon. He had been coming to our docks for 15 years and always had a flask and a story to share. That night, he kept his flask in his coat and spoke only when I pressed him. "The lake is wrong this year," he said. "The water is too warm for October, and the fish are moving south earlier than they should. We have been pulling up nets with holes torn through them. Not cut, torn. Something down there is hunting, and it is not seals or sturgeon." I asked what he thought it was. He looked past me toward the black water and did not answer. We heard it for the first time on the night of October 12th. The fog had come in so thick that the channel markers disappeared from view. We worked by lantern light, unloading sacks of grain from a steamer out of Duluth. The work was steady and quiet. Even Tommy kept his jokes to himself. The only sounds were the creak of ropes, the thud of sacks on the dock, and the gentle slap of water against the pilings. Then we heard the breathing. It came from somewhere out in the harbor, beyond the edge of the pier. It was low and steady, like the exhale of something large rising to the surface. The sound carried across the water and seemed to press against the fog. We all stopped working at the same moment. Henrik set down his hook and turned toward the sound. Vincent moved to the edge of the dock and leaned out over the water. Frank raised his hand for silence. The breathing came again, closer this time. It had a wet quality to it, as if the air was being forced through something thick and heavy. Then it stopped. We stood in the quiet for a full minute listening. Tommy let out a nervous laugh and said it was probably a tugboat idling in the channel. No one else spoke. We finished unloading the grain in half the usual time and left the dock as soon as the last sack was stacked. The next morning, we found a rowboat overturned and floating near the south pier. The oars were still lashed to the seats, but the hull had been crushed inward on one side. The wood was splintered and bent as if something had struck it from below with tremendous force. The harbor patrol pulled it in and examined the damage. They said it must have been hit by a larger vessel, but no captain reported a collision, and no one had seen the rowboat occupied the night before. Vincent pointed out that the damage was too localized. A glancing blow from a ship would have torn the entire side off or capsized it. This looked like something had punched through the hull in one concentrated strike. The patrol dismissed his observation and towed the wreckage away. That afternoon, Frank called a meeting in the warehouse. He stood near the loading doors with his arms crossed and his jaw set tight. He told us the company wanted us to work faster. More ships were coming in over the next 2 weeks, and they needed the berths cleared quickly. He said we would be running double shifts with only 4 hours of rest between them. He also said the company had agreed to station a watchman on the pier overnight, though he did not say why. We all understood. Something was wrong in the harbor, and the company knew it. They were not telling us what it was, but they were taking precautions. I did not like working in the dark after that. The lanterns we used cast long shadows across the water, and every ripple looked like movement. The fog made it worse. It turned sounds into shapes, and shapes into threats. I found myself watching the water more than the cargo, waiting for something to break the surface. Henrik began carrying a long iron hook with him at all times, even when we were working dry cargo that did not require it. He kept it propped against whatever he was lifting and never let it out of reach. When I asked why, he said only that iron was heavy enough to do damage if something came up the pilings. The breathing sound returned 3 nights later. This time, we were working the far pier, unloading coal from a steamer out of Gary. The work was filthy and exhausting. Coal dust coated our clothes and skin, and the fine black powder hung in the air with every sack we hoisted. The fog had come in again, thicker than before, and the lanterns barely cut through it. We worked in near darkness, guided by the feel of the rope and the sound of the sacks hitting the dock. The breathing started just after midnight. It was louder than before, and it came from directly below the pier. We all heard it this time. Even Tommy, who tried to laugh it off again and failed. The sound rose and fell in a steady rhythm, like something massive drawing air through a passage too narrow for its size. Vincent dropped his hook and moved to the edge. He knelt and held his lantern out over the water. The light caught the surface and showed ripples spreading outward from beneath the pier. The water was moving in a pattern that did not match the current or the wind. Something large was circling below us. Frank told us to keep working. His voice was tight, but he did not raise it. He stepped to the edge beside Vincent and looked down into the water. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Frank stepped back and told us to stop for the night. He said we would finish the coal in the morning when the light was better. No one argued. We gathered our tools and walked back down the pier in a tight group. The breathing followed us until we reached the warehouse. Then it stopped, and the harbor went silent again. The next morning, the dock supervisor called Frank into the office. When he came out, his face was hard and pale. He told us the company had found marks on the underside of the pier, deep scratches in the wood, running parallel like the ones on the ship hulls. The pilings had been scored so deeply that some of them would need to be replaced. The company blamed it on shifting ice. Even though the water had not frozen yet that season, Frank did not believe it, and neither did we. That night, the watchman they had hired refused to return. He said he had heard something moving in the water beneath the pier. He said it sounded like something dragging itself across the pilings, testing the wood. He said he had seen a shape rise near the surface, too large to be a fish and too deliberate in its movements to be driftwood. He quit on the spot and left the harbor before sunset. The company did not hire a replacement. Instead, they told us to work in groups of 6 or more and to keep the lanterns burning at all times. They also gave us whistles to signal for help if we saw anything unusual. I kept mine on a cord around my neck, but I did not trust it. A whistle would not stop whatever was circling below the docks. The weather turned bitter in mid-October. The wind came down hard from the north and brought sleet that froze on the ropes and made every surface slick. The work became dangerous. Men slipped on the icy planks and dropped cargo. Tommy nearly lost 3 fingers when a crate shifted and caught his hand against the dock. Jack pulled him free and wrapped the wound with a strip of cloth torn from his own shirt. Tommy's hand swelled and turned dark, but he refused to see a doctor. He said he could not afford to miss work. The ships kept coming. They arrived late at night and left before dawn, as if the captains no longer trusted the daylight hours either. We unloaded them as quickly as we could, working through the cold and the fog and the constant sense that something was watching us from the water. Vincent stopped talking to the rest of us. He spent his breaks standing at the edge of the dock, staring into the harbor. When I asked him what he was looking for, he said he was trying to understand the pattern. He said the damaged cargo always came from the deepest crossings, the ships that traveled through the middle of the lake instead of hugging the shoreline. He said the marks on the hulls were always on the starboard side, as if something had approached from the same direction. Each time. He said he thought it was following the shipping lanes, learning the routes. I asked him what he meant by learning. He turned and looked at me with an expression I did not recognize. "It is hunting us," he said. On the night of October 20th, the fog was so thick that we could not see from one end of the pier to the other. Frank wanted to call off the shift, but the company insisted. A steamer from Marquette had arrived with a load of iron ore, and they needed it unloaded before the next ship came in at dawn. We lit every lantern we had and went out onto the pier in a group. The cold bit through our coats and the fog clung to our skin like wet cloth. We could hear the water moving below us, but we could not see it. The steamer loomed above us, a dark mass in the fog. We rigged the cargo net and began hoisting the first load of ore. The work was slow. The fog made everything harder. We lost sight of each other if we moved more than a few feet apart. Frank kept calling out names to make sure we were all still there. Vincent, Tommy, Jack, Henrik, Seamus, Patrick, me. We answered in turn, our voices muffled by the fog. The breathing sound started again just after we hoisted the third load. It was closer than it had ever been, rising from directly beneath the pier. We all stopped and listened. This time, the sound did not stop. It continued in a steady rhythm, growing louder with each breath. Henrik dropped his rope and grabbed his iron hook. He held it like a weapon and backed toward the warehouse. Vincent moved to the edge of the pier and looked down. His lantern flickered in the fog, throwing weak light across the water. Then he went rigid. His hand tightened on the lantern handle, and his breath came out in short bursts. Frank moved beside him and looked down. I saw his shoulders stiffen. Tommy started to move toward them, but Jack grabbed his arm and held him back. I stepped to the edge and looked into the water. At first, I saw nothing but black surface and ripples. Then the water bulged upward in a smooth dome, as if something massive was rising from below. The dome broke, and a shape emerged. It was not a fish. It was not a seal. It was too large, too broad, too deliberate in its movements. The head came first, wide and flat with a blunt snout. The skin was dark and slick, covered in a pattern of ridges that caught the lantern light. The ridges ran in parallel lines from the crown of the skull down toward what I assumed was the neck, each one raised and hard like ancient scar tissue. Two eyes reflected back at us, set far apart and unblinking. They were not the eyes of an animal. They held a focus that felt intentional, as if the creature was studying us with the same curiosity we might study an insect. The eyes had depth to them, a quality of awareness that sent ice through my chest. I had looked into the eyes of horses and dogs and cattle. Those eyes held fear or hunger or simple animal presence. These eyes held something more, something that suggested thought and memory and purpose. The body followed, rising higher until the water fell away from its back. It was longer than the pier was wide, thick through the middle, with a powerful tail that moved in slow, controlled sweeps. The muscles beneath the skin shifted with each movement, visible as bands of power that rippled beneath the surface. Water cascaded off the ridged back in sheets, catching the lamplight and turning to silver before splashing back into the harbor. The sheer mass of it made me understand how easily it could have crushed the rowboat or torn through the ship hulls. This was not a creature that relied on teeth alone. Its entire body was a weapon, built for power and endurance in the deep, cold water. The smell hit us then, the same sharp ammonia scent we had noticed on the damaged cargo, but stronger now, mixed with the stench of deep water and decay. It was the smell of something that lived where sunlight never reached, that fed on things that sank to the lake bottom and rotted in the cold and dark. My stomach turned, and I had to force myself not to gag. Beside me, I heard Tommy make a choking sound. The creature turned its head toward us and opened its mouth. Rows of teeth showed, not sharp like a shark's, but flat and crushing, designed to break through shell and bone. Each tooth was the size of my thumb, yellowed and worn from use. I could see fragments of something caught between them, pale bits that might have been fish scales, or might have been something else. The jaw itself looked powerful enough to snap a man in half with minimal effort. It exhaled, and the sound was the same breathing we had been hearing for weeks, but now we could see the source. The air rushed out through gill-like slits along its neck, forcing water and mist into the fog. No one moved. We stood frozen at the edge of the pier, staring down at something that should not have existed in Lake Michigan. The creature held its position in the water, floating with minimal effort, its eyes fixed on us. Then it sank. Not quickly, but with a slow, deliberate descent that felt like a warning. The water closed over its back, and the ripples spread outward and faded. We stood in silence for a long moment. Then Tommy vomited over the side of the pier. Jack pulled him back and held his shoulders. Henrik backed toward the warehouse, his hook still raised. Vincent set down his lantern and sat on a crate. His hands shook. Frank was the first to speak. "We are leaving," he said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the strain beneath it. "We are leaving now, and we are not coming back tonight." No one argued. We gathered our tools and walked down the pier in a tight group. The fog pressed around us, and every sound from the water made us walk faster. We did not run. Running would have been worse. We would have scattered, lost each other in the fog. So we walked, keeping close, until we reached the warehouse inside. Frank lit the stove and we stood around it, trying to warm hands that had gone numb. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Henrik broke the silence. "I saw something like that once," he said, "on Superior, near Isle Royale. The old men called it a lake demon. They said it came up from the deep water when the seasons changed, hunting for food before the ice set in. They said you could drive it off with noise and fire, but you could not kill it, not with anything we had." His voice carried the weight of memory, and I could see in his expression that whatever he had witnessed on Superior had marked him deeply. The other men in his crew had dismissed it as a sturgeon or a large pike. He continued, "But I saw its eyes just like you did tonight. No fish looks at you that way. No fish thinks about what it sees." Vincent looked at him. "How big was the one you saw?" "Bigger than this," Henrik said. "Big enough to overturn a fishing boat. The men who saw it did not go back on the water for a year. Some never went back at all. They found other work, moved to other towns, anything to avoid the lake. One man I knew took his family all the way to Montana, as far from deep water as he could get. He told me before he left that he could not sleep anymore near the lake. He said he felt it watching him, even from miles away on shore." Frank paced near the stove. "We need to tell the company," he said. "They need to know what is down there." Vincent shook his head. "They will not believe us. They will say we are drunk or tired or making excuses to avoid work. They will dock our pay and bring in new men who do not know better, and those men will die," Frank said. Vincent did not answer. The next morning, Frank went to the company office and reported what we had seen. He took Vincent with him as a witness. They were gone for 2 hours. When they returned, Frank's jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth would crack. "The company did not believe us," he said. "They said we saw a sturgeon or a log or a trick of the fog. They said if we refused to work, they would replace us. They said the contracts we signed did not include provisions for superstition. That night, we went back to the docks. The company assigned us to a different pier farther from the deep channel. They stationed 2 supervisors with us to make sure we kept working. We unloaded a shipment of lumber in silence, watching the water the entire time. The creature did not appear, but we could feel it. The water moved differently. The ripples ran in patterns that did not match the wind. Every shadow looked like a dorsal ridge breaking the surface. We worked through the night without rest. When dawn came, we left the pier exhausted and afraid. Over the next week, the sightings continued. Other crews reported seeing something large moving beneath the harbor. A tugboat captain swore he saw it surface near the breakwater and dive again before he could turn his searchlight on it. A fisherman found his nets shredded and his catch gone, with only bones and scales left behind. The company continued to deny it. They said the reports were exaggerated. They said the lake was full of large fish and there was nothing unusual about what we were seeing. They increased our shifts and brought in more cargo. They wanted to move as much freight as possible before the winter freeze, and they were willing to risk our lives to do it. We kept working because we had no choice. The pay was good, and jobs were hard to find in 1923. But we changed how we worked. We kept iron hooks and gaffs within reach at all times. We rigged spotlights along the piers and kept them burning all night. We worked in groups of 8 or more, and we never let anyone work alone near the water. The creature adapted. It stopped surfacing near the docks. Instead, it began circling the harbor at a distance, just beyond the reach of our lights. We could see its wake in the moonlight, a long V-shaped disturbance that moved with steady purpose. It was learning our patterns, just as Vincent had said. It was studying us. On the night of November 1st, the temperature dropped below freezing for the first time that season. Ice began forming along the edges of the harbor, thin sheets that cracked and shifted with the current. The company wanted us to work through it. They said the ice would thicken soon, and we needed to finish unloading the last shipments before the harbor closed for winter. We went out onto the pier with axes to break the ice away from the pilings. The work was brutal. The ice was thicker than it looked, and every swing of the axe sent vibrations up through our arms. The cold made our hands ache, and the wind cut through our coats. We worked in pairs, one man swinging while the other cleared the broken ice away. I was working with Vincent near the end of the pier when we heard the crack. It was loud and sharp, like a rifle shot. We both stopped and looked around. The ice near the pilings had split in a clean line, running from the water's edge up onto the dock. Vincent knelt and examined the crack. This was not made by cold, he said. Something pushed up from below. Before I could answer, the pier shook. It was a single hard jolt, like something had struck the underside of the structure. We both stumbled and caught ourselves on the railing. The rest of the crew felt it too. Frank shouted for everyone to move toward the warehouse. We dropped our tools and started walking. Then the pier shook again, harder this time. The jolt knocked Tommy off his feet. Jack pulled him up and pushed him forward. Henrik raised his hook and backed toward us, his eyes on the water. A third jolt hit, and this time we heard the wood crack. One of the support beams beneath the pier splintered with a sound like a tree breaking in a storm. The pier tilted slightly to one side. Frank yelled for us to run. We ran. The pier shook with every step, and the groaning of stressed wood filled the air. I could hear the creature below us, its breathing loud and rapid, synchronized with the impacts. It was ramming the pilings, trying to collapse the structure. We reached the warehouse just as the far end of the pier gave way. The pilings snapped, and the decking folded downward into the water. Cargo crates slid off the edge and vanished into the black. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the creature surfaced. It rose in the gap where the pier had been, its massive body twisting in the water. It was even larger than I remembered. The moonlight caught the ridges on its back and made them shine. It opened its mouth and let out a sound I had never heard before, a deep, resonant bellow that carried across the entire harbor. Then it dove, and the water surged up in a wave that crashed against the remaining pilings. We stood in the warehouse doorway watching the wreckage settle. The creature was gone, but the damage was done. Half the pier was destroyed, and the cargo we had been unloading was at the bottom of the harbor. The company could not deny it anymore. The next day, they closed the docks. They brought in engineers to assess the damage and divers to search for the cargo. The divers found the crates, but they also found something else. Deep gouges in the lake bed, running in long parallel lines. Tracks, the lead diver said, like something heavy, had been dragging itself across the bottom. The company hired a marine biologist from the university to investigate. He spent a week studying the marks on the hulls and the damaged pilings. He examined the tracks on the lake bed and interviewed everyone who had seen the creature. His conclusion was careful and measured. He said there were reports of large sturgeon in the Great Lakes, some growing to lengths of 12 feet or more. He said sturgeon could be aggressive when disturbed and were capable of damaging boats and docks. He said the sightings were likely a single large specimen that had been displaced from its normal territory by changing water temperatures. He did not explain the breathing sounds. He did not explain the intelligence behind the creature's movements. He did not explain why it had targeted the dock specifically. We knew the truth. This was not a sturgeon. This was something else, something older and stranger, something that had lived in the deep waters of Lake Michigan long before we came. The docks reopened in late November, but the work was never the same. We rebuilt the pier with thicker pilings and stronger beams. We installed more lights and kept armed watchmen on duty through the night. We changed our routes and schedules, working only in daylight when the water was clear and visibility was good. The creature did not return. As the ice thickened and winter closed the harbor, the sightings stopped. By December, the entire lake was frozen, and the shipping season ended. We told ourselves the creature had moved on, gone deeper into the lake or south toward warmer water. But we did not believe it. We had seen the way it watched us. We had felt the intelligence behind its actions. It had not left. It was waiting. I worked the docks for another 10 years after that night. I saw many things on the lake, storms and shipwrecks, ice that crushed steel hulls and fog that lasted for days, but I never saw the creature again. Neither did Vincent or Henrik or any of the others who had been there. Some of them left Milwaukee and found work inland. Others stayed, but refused to work the night shifts. Tommy's hand never healed properly, and he moved to Chicago to work in a factory. Jack followed him. The Irish brothers went back to the East Coast. Henrik died of pneumonia in 1927. Vincent kept working the docks until 1945, when age finally forced him to retire. He never stopped watching the water. In all those years, we never spoke publicly about what we saw. The company had made it clear that anyone who did would lose their job and their reputation. But among ourselves, in quiet moments, over coffee or beer, we remembered. We remembered the size of it, the deliberate way it moved, the intelligence in its eyes. We remembered the sound of its breathing and the way the pier shook when it struck from below. And we remembered that it was still out there, somewhere in the deep waters of Lake Michigan, waiting for the ice to melt and the ships to return. I am an old man now. Most of the men who worked alongside me that autumn are gone. The docks have changed. Steel and concrete have replaced wood. Modern ships with sonar and radar cross the lake without fear. But I still live near the harbor, and on certain nights when the fog rolls in thick and the moon stays hidden, I walk down to the water's edge and listen. Sometimes when the wind is still and the city is quiet, I hear it. That same low, steady breathing, rising from the depths, and I know that it remembers us too. The winter of 1923 brought the deepest freeze anyone could remember. The harbor ice grew thick enough to walk on by mid-December, and the shipping channels stayed closed until late April. The ice formed in layers, each one marking a night of bitter cold. You could see the strata when the ice chunks broke free in spring, showing the record of that winter like rings in a tree. Men who had lived in Milwaukee their entire lives said they had never seen the harbor freeze so solid or stay frozen so long. The old-timers claimed it was a sign, though they would not say of what. We did not work the docks during those months. Instead, the company moved us to the warehouses inland, sorting cargo and repairing equipment. We inventoried the supplies that had been rushed into storage before the freeze, checked rope for wear, oiled the block and tackle, sharpened the hooks and gaffs. The work was easier, warmer, but none of us felt relief. We knew what waited beneath the ice. I found myself thinking about it constantly during those long winter days. The creature had survived whatever had happened when we detonated the charges. It had been hurt badly, but it had escaped. And somewhere under that thick layer of ice, it was healing. I imagined it in the deepest part of the lake. in the cold darkness where pressure kept everything still and quiet. I wondered if it remembered us individually, or if we all looked the same to it, just small shapes moving on the surface. I wondered if it felt pain the way we did, or if its alien physiology processed injury differently. Most of all, I wondered if it would return when the ice melted. Frank tried to keep the crew together. Through that winter, he organized card games and brought in coffee on the coldest days. He never mentioned the creature directly, but sometimes, when the wind howled against the warehouse walls, he would stop what he was doing and stare toward the windows that faced the harbor. Vincent grew quieter as winter wore on. He stopped joining us for meals and spent his breaks alone, sketching diagrams on scraps of paper. His hands moved with fevered intensity, drawing and redrawing the same patterns. He filled page after page with calculations and observations, working through theories about the creature's behavior and biology. When I asked him what he was drawing, he showed me a map of the harbor with lines radiating out from the deep channel. He had marked the location of every damaged ship, every broken pier, every sighting. The lines connected in ways that suggested routes and territory. He had noted water temperatures, moon phases, shipping schedules, and weather patterns. The amount of detail was staggering. He must have been recording observations for months before the first encounter, collecting data without even realizing what he was tracking. The pattern was clear. The creature moved in a circuit, following the same routes the ships used during the season. It was territorial, Vincent said. It claimed the deep water as its own, and we had been trespassing. He tapped the map with his pencil, leaving small indentations in the paper. Next season, it will be ready for us. It has learned our patterns, the way we learn to avoid certain areas after accidents or close calls. We will need to learn its patterns in return. We need to think like it thinks, move like it moves. We need to understand what drives it beyond simple hunger. I asked him what he planned to do with that knowledge. He folded the map and put it in his coat pocket without answering, but I saw something in his eyes that worried me. Vincent was not just studying the creature anymore, he was becoming obsessed with it. He had started to see it as a puzzle that demanded solving, a mystery that consumed his every waking thought. I recognized the look from men who had worked the docks too long, who had let the job take over their lives until nothing else mattered. But Vincent's obsession went deeper. It was personal now. The ice began to break up in early April. The first cracks appeared along the southern edge of the harbor, spreading in jagged lines across the frozen surface. The sound carried for miles, a constant groaning and snapping that set everyone on edge. By mid-April, the channels were clear enough for the first ships to arrive. The company called us back to the docks. They had spent the winter rebuilding the damaged pier and installing new safety measures. Thick iron cables now reinforced the pilings, and powerful searchlights had been mounted on tall poles at regular intervals. They had also hired 2 armed guards to patrol the waterfront at night, though no one said what they were supposed to shoot if the creature returned. We gathered at the warehouse on the morning of our first shift back. Frank stood before us with his arms crossed and his face set in hard lines. He told us the company expected a heavy season. Ships were backed up in every port around the lake, waiting to move cargo that had been frozen in place for months. He said we would be working longer hours and handling more tonnage than ever before. He said the company had promised bonuses if we met their targets. Then he paused and looked at each of us in turn. He said the company had also made it clear that anyone who refused to work or caused disruptions would be replaced immediately. Jobs were scarce, he said. Men were hungry. There were dozens waiting for a chance to take our places. No one spoke. We all understood. We would go back to the docks, and we would face whatever was waiting there, or we would lose everything. The first week of the new season passed without incident. We unloaded lumber, grain and coal from ships that had been waiting in Muskegon and Manitowoc. The work was hard and the hours were long, but the weather was mild and the water stayed calm. The creature did not appear. Some of the men began to relax. Tommy, whose hand had healed enough for him to return to work, started making jokes again. He said the creature had probably frozen to death over the winter or moved south to warmer water. Jack told him to keep his voice down, but Tommy only laughed. Henrik did not laugh. He kept his iron hook close and watched the water constantly. Whenever a wave slapped against the pilings in an unusual rhythm, he would stop working and listen. Vincent spent his breaks walking the length of the pier, studying the water, checking the new reinforcements. He did not trust them. On the 8th night, the fog returned. It rolled in from the east just after sunset, thick and damp, smelling of deep water and decay. We were unloading a shipment of machine parts from a steamer out of Detroit. The work was slow because the crates were heavy and awkwardly shaped. Frank kept us moving in pairs, no one working alone, everyone within shouting distance. The searchlights cut through the fog in bright columns, but they only made the darkness beyond them seem deeper. We heard the breathing just before midnight. It started faint and distant, but it grew louder with each passing minute. The sound came from the north, beyond the reach of the searchlights. We all stopped working and turned toward it. Frank signaled for silence. The armed guards moved to the edge of the pier, their rifles ready. We waited. The breathing grew closer. We could hear the water moving, the steady rhythm of something large swimming just below the surface. The searchlight swung toward the sound, and for a moment, we saw it. The creature was even larger than I remembered. Its back broke the surface in a long, smooth arc, covered in those same dark ridges. It moved with power and confidence, cutting through the water without effort. The searchlights followed it as it circled the pier, staying just out of reach. One of the guards raised his rifle and fired. The shot cracked across the harbor and echoed off the warehouses. The bullet struck the water where the creature had been, but it had already dove. The ripples spread and faded. The breathing stopped. We stood in silence, waiting for it to surface again. Minutes passed. The fog pressed closer. The searchlight swept the water in slow arcs. Finding nothing, Frank ordered us back to work. We moved slowly, every man watching the water. The guards stayed at the edge of the pier, rifles raised. We finished unloading the machine parts and moved the crates into the warehouse. As we were preparing to leave, one of the guards shouted. We ran to the edge of the pier. The creature had surfaced near the breakwater, 100 yards from where we stood. It floated on the surface, its massive head turned toward us. Even at that distance, I could see its eyes reflecting the searchlights. It watched us for a long moment, then dove again and disappeared. That night set the pattern for the rest of the season. The creature appeared 2 or 3 times each week, always at night, always in the fog. It circled the harbor, testing the new defenses, learning our routines. It never came close enough for the guards to get a clear shot, but it never stayed away long enough for us to forget it was there. The sightings wore us down. We grew tired and jumpy. Small sounds made us flinch. Shadows in the water drew our attention away from the work. Accidents became more common. Men dropped cargo or stumbled on the slick planks. One night, Seamus fell and broke his wrist. Another night, Patrick cut his leg on a sharp edge of steel and needed 12 stitches. The company brought in replacement workers, but they did not last. The new men would work 1 or 2 nights, see the creature, and quit. Some left without even collecting their pay. Word spread through Milwaukee that the docks were cursed. Men stopped applying for jobs there. The company raised wages, but it did not help. By June, we were down to the original crew plus 3 new men who were desperate enough to stay. Frank tried to keep morale up, but even he was showing the strain. His hands shook when he thought no one was watching. He started drinking after shifts, something he had never done before. Vincent continued his observations. He filled notebook after notebook with drawings and notes. He tracked the creature's movements, timed its appearances, recorded the weather conditions. He was looking for a pattern, some way to predict when and where it would appear. One night in early July, he found it. We were sitting in the warehouse during a break, drinking coffee and trying to stay warm. Vincent spread his notebooks across a crate and showed us what he had discovered. The creature appeared most often during the new moon, he said. It preferred calm water and heavy fog. It always approached from the deep channel and always circled counterclockwise around the harbor, and it was getting bolder. Each appearance brought it closer to the docks. Frank asked what we could do with that information. Vincent tapped one of his notebooks. "We can set a trap," he said. "We can choose the time and place of the next encounter instead of waiting for it to choose. We can be ready." Henrik asked, what kind of trap could hold something that large? Vincent smiled, but there was no humor in it. "We do not need to hold it," he said. "We only need to hurt it badly enough that it leaves and does not come back." He outlined his plan. We would wait for the next new moon, which would occur in 3 days. We would rig explosive charges on the underside of the pier, placed where Vincent predicted the creature would surface. When it appeared, we would detonate the charges and drive it away with noise and fire, just as Henrik had said his people had done on Lake Superior. Frank listened without interrupting. When Vincent finished, Frank asked if the company would approve. Vincent shook his head. "The company will not approve anything that might damage the pier or disrupt the schedule. We will have to do this ourselves, on our own time. That means we risk our jobs," Frank said. "We risk more than jobs if we do nothing," Vincent answered. "The creature is learning. Soon it will not be satisfied with circling and watching. It will attack." Frank looked at the rest of us. Tommy and Jack nodded immediately. The Irish brothers conferred quietly, then agreed. Henrik simply raised his hook in acknowledgement. I hesitated. What Vincent was proposing could get us killed. The explosives might not work. The creature might turn on us. The company might fire us all. But I thought of the way the creature had looked at us that first night, the intelligence in its eyes, the deliberate nature of its movements. Vincent was right. It was learning, and it would not stay passive forever. I agreed. We spent the next 2 days preparing. Vincent acquired the explosives from a demolitions crew that was clearing old buildings near the harbor. He said he called in favors and paid with money he had been saving for years. The charges were small but powerful, designed to break concrete. We would use 4 of them, placed in a square pattern beneath the pier. Frank arranged for us to have access to the docks on the night of the new moon. He told the company we needed to do maintenance work on the pilings. It was not entirely a lie. We would be working on the pier, just not in the way the company expected. The night arrived cold and clear. No fog, which worried Vincent. He said the creature might not appear without the cover of mist, but we had committed to the plan, and we could not afford to wait another month. We arrived at the docks just after sunset. The harbor was quiet. No ships were scheduled to arrive that night, and the company had given the guards the evening off at Frank's request. We were alone. We worked quickly, rigging the charges to the underside of the pier, exactly where Vincent had marked on his maps. Each charge was connected to a long wire that ran back to a detonator on the dock. Vincent tested the connections 3 times to make sure everything was ready. We finished just before midnight. Then we waited. The hours passed slowly. We sat in the darkness, watching the water, listening for the breathing sound. The cold seeped through our coats, and the waiting made every minute feel longer. Tommy grew restless and paced along the pier. Jack told him to sit still. Henrik stood at the edge with his hook, staring into the water. Vincent crouched beside the detonator, his hand resting on the plunger. Frank kept checking his watch. At 2 a.m, Henrik raised his hand. We all went silent. The breathing had started, faint and distant, coming from the deep channel. Vincent moved to the edge of the pier and looked out across the water. His expression tightened. "It is coming," he whispered. The breathing grew louder. We could see the water moving, ripples spreading outward from something large, approaching beneath the surface. Vincent backed up to the detonator and knelt beside it. The rest of us moved to the sides of the pier, giving him a clear line of sight to the water. The creature surfaced exactly where Vincent had predicted. It rose slowly, its massive head breaking the water first, then its broad back. It floated on the surface, so close that I could have hit it with a thrown stone. The ridges on its skin caught the starlight. Its eyes reflected nothing. It looked at us with that same focused intelligence I remembered from our first encounter. Vincent did not hesitate. He pushed the plunger down with both hands. The charges exploded in a sequence of 4 sharp cracks. Water erupted upward in white columns, and the shockwave rolled across the harbor. The creature thrashed, its body twisting violently. The water around it turned to foam. We covered our ears against the noise, but we kept our eyes on the creature. It was hurt. The explosions had torn into its side, opening gashes that bled dark fluid into the water. It let out that deep bellow again, louder than before, a sound of pain and rage. Then it dove, disappearing beneath the churning surface. We waited for it to resurface, but it did not. The water calmed and the ripples faded. The only evidence of what had happened was the dark stain spreading across the surface and the smell of blood mixing with lake water. We did not celebrate. We had heard it, but we did not know if we had driven it away or only made it angrier. Frank ordered us to leave immediately. We gathered our equipment and hurried off the pier. Behind us, the water remained still and dark. The company discovered what we had done the next morning. The explosions had damaged 2 of the pilings, and the blast marks were impossible to hide. Frank was called into the office and questioned for 3 hours. When he came out, his face was pale and hard. We were all fired. The company said we had destroyed property and violated safety regulations. They said we were lucky they were not pressing criminal charges. They gave us 1 week's pay and told us to clear out our lockers by the end of the day. We left the docks without protest. We had known the risk when we made the plan. Some of the men found work at other docks around the lake. Tommy and Jack went to Chicago as they had planned. The Irish brothers returned to Boston. Henrik took a job at a grain elevator inland, away from the water. Vincent stayed in Milwaukee, but never returned to dock work. He took a job as a night watchman at a factory where he could be alone with his notebooks. Frank opened a small tavern near the harbor. He never spoke about what happened, but sometimes, late at night, when the fog rolled in, he would stand at the window and look toward the water. I stayed as well. I found work at a shipyard repairing hulls. It was cleaner work, and I spent my days in dry dock where I could see the damage the lake inflicted on steel and wood. I learned to read the scratches and dents to understand what had caused them. Sometimes I saw marks that I recognized, deep parallel gouges that no ice or rock could have made. I kept those observations to myself. The creature did not return to Milwaukee Harbor that season. The shipping companies reported no more damaged cargo, no more torn nets, no more mysterious sounds in the fog. The docks operated normally for the rest of the year. Some people said we had killed it. Others said we had driven it away. Vincent believed we had only wounded it and taught it to fear us. He thought it had gone deeper into the lake, away from the shipping lanes, back to whatever depths it had come from. Years passed. The incident faded from memory. New workers came to the docks who had never heard the stories. The company removed the reinforced pilings and the searchlights. The harbor returned to what it had been before, a place of work and commerce where men loaded cargo and did not think about what lived beneath the surface. But those of us who had been there remembered. We carried the memory in the way we moved near water, in the way we flinched at unexpected sounds, in the way we watched the fog roll in on autumn nights. I saw Vincent occasionally over the years. He aged quickly, his hair turning white and his face growing lined. He still carried his notebooks, adding observations and theories. He told me once that he had tracked reports from other ports around the lake, places where fishermen had found damaged nets or captains had reported strange sightings. The creature was still out there, he said. It had not died. It had only moved, choosing different hunting grounds, avoiding the places where it had been hurt. In 1945, when the war ended and the shipyards emptied, I took a job on a passenger steamer that ran between Milwaukee and Muskegon. It was peaceful work, carrying tourists and families across the lake during the summer months. I worked on deck, helping passengers with their luggage and pointing out landmarks along the shore. One evening in July, we were crossing the lake at sunset when the captain changed course slightly to avoid a patch of rough water. I was standing at the rail when I saw it. Just below the surface, visible for only a moment in the clear water, a massive dark shape moved parallel to our ship. It was too large to be a sturgeon, too deliberate in its movements to be debris. I watched it keep pace with us for nearly a minute before it dove and disappeared into the depths. I did not report it. I simply gripped the rail and waited for my hands to stop shaking. That night, I dreamed of the pier and the fog and the breathing sound rising from the water. When I woke, I decided to leave the lake. I moved inland and found work in a factory, far from any large body of water. I told myself I was getting too old for deck work, that my back could not handle the long hours. But the truth was simpler. I could not spend another season watching the water, waiting for that shape to appear again. Vincent died in 1953. He collapsed at his watchman's post and was found the next morning with his notebook scattered around him. At his funeral, I met Henrik again. We stood together at the graveside and did not speak until everyone else had left. Henrik asked if I ever thought about that night on the pier. I said I thought about it often. He nodded and looked toward the harbor, visible in the distance between the buildings. "It is still there," he said, waiting. "Some things do not die, they only go deeper." Frank's Tavern closed in 1961 when his health failed. He had never married, never left Milwaukee, never stopped watching the harbor. Before he died, he gave me a box of old papers from the dock office, documents he had kept hidden for decades. Among them were reports from other workers, men who had seen the creature in the years after we left. The sightings were infrequent, but consistent. Always in the deep water, always at night. The reports had been filed away and forgotten, dismissed as the imaginings of tired men or the effects of drink. But Frank had believed them. He had marked each one on a map, tracking the creature's movements around the lake. The pattern was clear. It was still there, still hunting, still claiming the deep water as its own territory. I am the last of the original crew now. Tommy died in Chicago in 1971. Jack followed 2 years later. The Irish brothers passed within months of each other in the early 80s. Henrik lived until 1992, dying quietly in a nursing home far from any lake or sea. I am 84 now, living in a small house within sight of the Milwaukee harbor. My body is failing. My hands shake with palsy, and my legs can barely carry me up a flight of stairs. The doctors tell me my heart is weak, that I should avoid exertion and stress. They do not understand that avoiding stress is impossible when you carry the memories I carry. But my mind is clear and my memory has not faded. In some ways, it has grown sharper with age, as if my brain knows these memories need to be preserved before they are lost forever. I still remember every detail of that autumn in 1923. The cold and the fog, the weight of cargo on my shoulders, the fear that came with each nightfall. I can close my eyes and feel the rough hemp rope in my hands, smell the coal dust and fish oil, hear the slap of water against the pilings. I remember the faces of the men I worked with, their voices, their habits. I remember Henrik's warnings and Vincent's obsessive note-taking and Tommy's nervous laughter. I remember Frank's steady leadership and the way Jack watched over his younger brother. I remember the creature rising from the water, the intelligence in its eyes, the deliberate way it studied us, every ridge on its skin, every movement of its powerful tail, every exhalation from those gill-like slits remains vivid in my mind. And I remember that we heard it, but did not kill it. That knowledge has stayed with me through all these years, a constant weight that never fully lifts. On certain nights, I walk down to the harbor. My legs complain, and my breath comes short, but I make the journey. I stand at the edge where the old pier used to be, now rebuilt with modern materials and brighter lights. I watch the water and listen. The harbor has changed. Container ships have replaced the old steamers. Cranes tower over the docks where men once lifted cargo by hand. The work is faster, cleaner, more efficient, but the lake itself has not changed. It is still deep and cold and dark, and on nights when the fog rolls in thick and the moon stays hidden, I hear it. That same slow, steady breathing, rising from the depths. Sometimes I see other people standing at the water's edge, dock workers finishing late shifts, or couples walking along the harbor path. They do not hear what I hear. They do not see the water move in ways that do not match the wind or current. They do not understand that they are standing on the edge of something vast and ancient, something that permits them to cross its territory but does not forget their presence. I have thought about telling my story many times over the years. I have written it down in notebooks like Vincent did, trying to capture every detail before my memory fails. The notebooks fill a drawer in my desk. Pages and pages of cramped handwriting documenting everything I can remember. Sometimes I take them out and read through them, checking my words against my memories, making sure I have not forgotten anything important. But I have never shown them to anyone. Who would believe an old man's tales of lake monsters and exploding piers? The world has moved on. People have stopped believing in things they cannot see on screens or measure with instruments. They trust data and photographs and scientific consensus. And old dock workers' memories carry no weight against that kind of certainty. I once tried to tell my grandson about it. He was 12 at the time, old enough to understand, but young enough to still have imagination. We were sitting by the harbor on a summer evening, watching the boats come in. I began to tell him about the creature, about what we had seen and done. He listened politely for a few minutes, then asked if I was making up a story like the ones his mother read to him at bedtime. When I insisted it was true, he looked uncomfortable and changed the subject. I never tried to tell him again. But belief does not change reality. The creature exists. It has always existed, long before we built our docks and sailed our ships across the lake. It will continue to exist long after we are gone and our cities have crumbled back into the earth. The lake will remain deep and cold and dark, and the creature will remain with it. We were never hunting it. It was tolerating us. That is the truth Vincent understood and tried to teach us. We are visitors on the lake, temporary and fragile. We float on the surface for a few brief decades, and then we are gone, replaced by others who know nothing of what came before. But the creature is permanent. It is part of the deep water, as much as the cold and the pressure and the darkness. It has been there for centuries, perhaps millennia, long before the first French voyagers paddled across these waters. We can hurt it, frighten it, drive it away for a time, but we cannot remove it. It belongs to the lake in a way we never will. Last week, I read a news report about a shipping accident on Lake Michigan. A cargo vessel reported hitting something large beneath the surface near the deep channel between Milwaukee and Grand Haven. The impact damaged the hull and forced the ship to return to port for repairs. The Coast Guard investigated and found no debris, no rocks, no underwater obstruction that could explain the collision. They classified it as an unexplained incident and closed the case. I knew what had happened. The creature had returned to the Milwaukee shipping lanes. Perhaps enough time had passed that it no longer feared us. Perhaps a new generation of ships had made it curious again. Or perhaps it was simply reclaiming territory it had never truly abandoned. I keep the box of Frank's papers on a shelf in my study. Sometimes I take them out and read through the reports, tracing the pattern of sightings across the decades. The pattern is still there, still clear. The creature moves through the lake in long circuits, following the deep water, surfacing in places where humans rarely travel. And every few years, it returns to Milwaukee Harbor. I do not know what will happen when I am gone. The knowledge I carry will die with me unless I find someone to pass it to. But who would listen? Who would believe? The world has no place for stories of lake monsters and ancient creatures. We have explained away the mysteries, rationalized the unknown, paved over the places where the old things lived, but the lake remembers. The water holds secrets that cannot be explained or dismissed. And on certain nights, when the conditions are right and the fog rolls in thick, the creature rises from the depths and reminds us that we are not alone. I hear it now as I write these final words. The breathing sound carries across the water, steady and patient. The fog is thick tonight, and the harbor lights make fuzzy halos in the mist. I am too old and weak to walk down to the water's edge, but I do not need to. I know what I would see. The same dark shape breaking the surface, the same ridged back, the same eyes reflecting the light with that cold intelligence. It has outlived all of us. It will outlive the docks and the ships and the city itself. When Milwaukee is gone and the harbor has returned to wilderness, the creature will still be there, swimming in the deep water, claiming its territory. That is my story. The truth of what happened in 1923 and what continues to happen in the deep waters of Lake Michigan. I have written it down not because I expect anyone to believe it, but because it deserves to be remembered. We were not heroes. We were only men trying to earn a living, trying to survive in a world that was larger and stranger than we understood. We faced something that should not have existed, and we survived only because we were lucky and because it allowed us to survive. The creature could have killed us at any time. It chose not to. That choice haunts me more than any nightmare. I do not know why it spared us. Perhaps we were too small to bother with, too insignificant to waste energy on. Perhaps it saw us as part of the lake's ecosystem, as natural as the fish we caught and the cargo we moved. Or perhaps it was simply curious, studying us the same way we studied it, learning our patterns and behaviors. Whatever the reason, I am grateful. I have lived a long life, raised children, seen grandchildren grow. I have known love and friendship and the satisfaction of hard work done well. None of that would have been possible if the creature had decided we were threats rather than curiosities. So I offer this story not as a warning, but as a testament. The lake is not empty. The deep water holds things we do not understand and cannot control. We can build our docks and sail our ships and pretend we have mastered the water, but we are only visitors. The lake belongs to what lives beneath it. Remember that when you stand at the water's edge. Remember that when you hear sounds you cannot explain. Remember that the world is older and stranger than we admit, and that some mysteries are not meant to be solved. The creature is still there, waiting in the depths, and as long as the lake exists, it will remain.